So this here is the last part of today. Will be the last day of like covering new material or covering material over chapter 7. We will be taking our chapter 7 test next Thursday. Next Thursday will be the test over this. Now, when we look at any of these here, for solving these rational equations, we really want to simplify out the denominators, because if I can simplify the denominators, it's going to make them a little bit easier to work with, because we don't have to work with fractions. Now, the x plus 3 is fine, but if we look at these here, x squared minus 9 and x squared minus 6x plus 9, those two are not factorable. We can't factor them down. Or not, we can factor those down. Otherwise, that'd make this problem a lot harder than it already is. It'll make it a lot harder, not harder than it already is. Because if they didn't factor, that means I'm having to multiply through by two different quadratics. And x squared minus 9, we know, is factorable. It is a difference of perfect squares, yes? So if I were to factor this, well, we would have x minus 3 and x plus 3. It would factor as our difference of perfect squares. Now, x squared minus 6x plus 9 is not a difference of perfect squares. It's actually a sum. It's a perfect square trinomial is the specific name it has. Because if we look at this here, because the 9 is positive, the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term. So they would both be negative. Now the factors of x squared are going to be x and x. And the factors of 9 are 3 and 3. So we get this here. Well, and as we've done this before, okay, well, we have x minus 3 and x plus 3. They show up on all these spots. So I can multiply each one of these by x minus 3 and x plus 3. And this will work just fine, right? Because if we look at the first one, x minus 3 and x minus 3. X plus 3 and x plus 3. We're good there. I look at this last one here, x plus 3 and x plus 3. So we're good in most all of these here. We just have the middle one left, so I have an x minus 3 and an x minus 3. Wait. Well, the x plus 3 won't simplify out with the x minus 3, will it? So what am I missing? I'm missing an x minus 3. And I have to add it to all of them. Because I need a second x minus 3 so that the denominator of the middle one will simplify. So we needed an extra one because there were, how many of them there? 2. Since there are 2 that showed up, we had to have it twice. So if it only shows up once in each spot, we only need it to show up once when we multiply. But because it showed up twice, we needed it twice. And that's kind of why I show this one here, because if one of the denominators has 2 of the same thing, we need it twice. And we can do it like we just did when you multiply through, seeing if everything simplifies in the denominator. If it doesn't, then we have to add it back in. Then we need to add it in. So, has everything in each one of the denominators of these fractions simplified out? Well, yes, it simplified out now once we added that extra 1. And let's see what we have left. Well, in the first one, we have 4x times, well, we just have x minus 3. That's the only thing that was left. Equals. Well, in the middle one, we have x minus 1 times x plus 3 plus 2 times. So wait, what do we have left here? X minus 3 and So I was left with x minus 3 and x minus 3, yes? Well, where did we get those two factors from? I'll have to erase a little bit. Didn't we get it from the x squared minus 6x plus 9? Well, yeah. So if we got it from there, we can put it back together to x squared minus 6x plus 9, because that's where we got it from. So we can go right back to that. Okay. So now we're going to go on and continue solving this here. So we can simplify these parentheses. So the first thing we can do is distribute the 4x. Well, 4x times x will give us 4x squared. 4x times negative 3 will be negative 12x. So we just had to distribute that there. Now our next set we're going to distribute, we're going to multiply through, so we'll have x times x, which would give us x squared. X times 3 would be plus 3x. Then we'll have to do the same thing with the negative 1. Negative 1 times x will give us negative x. And negative 1 times 3 will give us negative 3. We also have to distribute our 2. We have to multiply through by 2. So 2 times x squared is going to be 2x squared. 2 times our negative 6 will be negative 12x. And 2 times 9 will give us 18. We're going to continue to distribute these numbers through. Any questions on any of this here? Questions on anything we've done so far? Okay, at this point here, we can combine our like terms, the numbers that we have in common. Well, on the left side, the 4x squared and 12x, that is already as simplified as they can come, because there's nothing that we can combine. They are not like terms. Now, on our other side here, we do have x squared and 2x squared. Those are like terms, so we can add those together. So x squared plus 2x squared will give us 3x squared. Now we do have a few x terms. We have 3x minus x. Well, 3x minus x is 2x. Minus 12x would be negative 10x, because 3 minus 1 is 2, and 2 minus 12 will give us negative 10. The last thing we have is negative 3 plus 18. Negative 3 plus 18 will be plus 15. Okay, now at this point here, we need to get everything on the same side of the equal sign. We need to get everything together. And because this is a quadratic, it's going to be, that's part of the reason we get everything on the same side. But it's also going to be nice to having the x squared, the term with the highest power, positive. So we can move everything from the right side to the left, or the left to the right, which is going to be easier. Right to left, we can do that. So we can add 12x first. We can add 12x to both sides. And if we add 12x to both sides, well, negative 12x plus 12x will cancel, leaving me with 4x squared is equal to 3x squared. Well, negative 10x plus 12x would be plus 2x plus 15. Now at this point here, we still need to get all the variables, everything on the same side. So we can subtract 4x squared from both sides. Well, 4x squared minus 4x squared would give me 0. Is equal to 3 minus 4x squared would be negative x squared plus 2x plus 15. So if we look at this here, and we're looking at this here, well, x squared is negative. So we have this here, x squared is negative. Now, are there any questions on how we got to this point? Any questions on anything we've done so far? Now, it's a little bit difficult solving when x is negative. So what we can do is we can actually make it positive. How can we turn it from a negative to a positive? Well, you multiply it by a negative. What negative? Negative 1. Because we can come in and multiply the whole equation by negative 1. It's not going to change any of the numbers. It won't change the solution, but it'll make the term in front of x squared, our biggest exponent, positive because it's a little bit easier to work with. Well, 0 times negative 1 is, well, still 0. Now, if we multiply everything in here by negative 1, well, negative 1 times negative x squared, the negative and negative make a positive. Negative 1 times 2x is going to be negative 2x. And negative 1 times 15 is negative 15. So we're able to make it the x squared positive, which is a little bit easier to work with, especially if we are factoring. It's going to make it easier to factor. Now, since the 15 is negative, our signs are going to be what? Opposite. One's going to be positive, and one is going to be negative. The factors of x squared are going to be what? X and x. And the factors of 15. 5 and 3. Which one would be positive? 3 would be positive, and the 5 would be negative. And we've got it factors. These are the factors for this here. And because we have two things multiplied together that equal 0, it means one of them has to be 0. Either x plus 3 is equal to 0, or x minus 5 is equal to 0. And we can solve these here. So for x plus 3, to solve for the value of x, we would subtract 3 from both sides. And if we subtract 3 from both sides, we get that x is equal to negative 3. On our other equation, we're going to add 5 to both sides. And when we add 5 to both sides, we get that x is equal to 5. And these here are the two solutions that we would have, negative 3 and 5, when we get all the way down here. Now, again, we do need to pay attention to our restrictions. So if we look back up at the top here, well, we had x minus 3, x plus 3, x minus 3, x plus 3. Well, these are both still x minus 3 and x plus 3. So what value of x is going to make x minus 3 be 0? 3. So x cannot be 3. Well, with x plus 3, x cannot be, because negative 3 plus 3 is 0. 3 minus 3 is 0. These are our two restrictions, and they show up here and here also. So we know our solution cannot be 3 or negative 3. So when we look down here, well, x is equal to negative 3 will not work because it'll cause the denominator to become 0. So it is not one of our solutions that works. But x equal to 5, this one here will. So x equals 5 is our solution. It's the one that works. Any questions on this here? Any questions on anything we've done so far? Are we good with this here? Yes? Okay. I know that we can do this one here and this one here. I want to move to this one. This one here that was drawn in, or kind of handwritten on the back. So let's look at this problem here. So we want to solve this here for our values of x. Find out what value of x will make this true. Now, when we look at this here, 2 over x minus 1 in the denominator won't factor. Then we have 1 over x plus 1. Well, x plus 1 will not factor. And that leaves us with our x squared minus x minus 2. Well, it will factor. So if we look at this here, since 2 is negative, our signs are going to be opposite. The factors of x squared are x and x. And the factors of 2 are, well, what? 1 and 2. So which one would be positive and which one would be negative? 1 would be positive and 2 would be negative. So we get those factors. So any questions on anything we've done so far? Okay. Now what are we going to multiply everything by? What is going to be the least common denominator for this here? And that's what we're going to multiply everything by. Because when we multiply by these, it will reduce each and every single one of these fractions. Now, before we get too deep into this, because it'd be probably nice to remember our restrictions, what x cannot be. So what would our restrictions for this here be? One, negative 1, and 2, yes. Because for our x minus 1 here, x cannot be 1, because 1 minus 1 is 0. We cannot have the denominator be 0. Well, x plus 1, negative 1 plus 1 is 0. And our x minus 2, well, 2 minus 2 is 0. So those would be our restrictions. Okay. We ready to simplify some things out? So our x minus 1 and x minus 1 would cancel. X plus 1 and x plus 1 would cancel. And our x plus 1 and x plus 1 would cancel. X minus 2 and x minus 2 would cancel. So that simplifies a lot of these here, especially the one on the right, the fraction on the right, far right, really does simplify. So we multiply these back out. We have 2 times, well, we have x plus 1 and x minus 2. Well, yes. Because that's where we got the x factors for x squared minus x minus 2. That factored down to x plus 1 and x minus 2. So if we notice that, okay, we got those 2 from that, I can replace it with our x squared minus x minus 2 already. There's nothing wrong with putting it down as x plus 1 and x minus 2, because when we do multiply, it will get back to there. So we can write it down as the multiples are this here. Either way, it will work. Plus, 1 times, well, we have x minus 1 times x minus 2. So that one we don't have listed already, but we'll have to multiply it out, is equal to, well, the only thing left over here is x minus 1 times 1, which will just be x minus 1, since it's being multiplied with 1. Which gets us to this here. Once we've simplified everything down, we don't have any more fractions anymore, since we multiplied each one of these terms by x minus 1, x plus 1, and x minus 2. Any questions on any of this here so far? Are we good with all this here? Okay, the next thing we can do is we can distribute, and we can simplify a lot of these terms here. We're going to simplify it down. 2 times x squared will give us 2x squared. 2 times negative x will be negative 2x, and 2 times negative 2 will be negative 4. So we can multiply through by this value of 2 plus. We're going to have to simplify these here. These two sets of parentheses. We're going to have to multiply them out so that we can solve for the value of x. Well, x times x will give us x squared. X times negative 2 will give us negative 2x. And then we can move on to the negative 1. Well, negative 1 times x will be negative x. And negative 1 times negative 2. The negative and negative will give us a positive 2. Because 1 times 2 will give us 2. And this here is equal to x minus 1. Now, because we have plus, we really didn't need to write the parentheses around those two middle, the x minus 1 times x minus 2 when we multiplied that through, because it's positive. Now, if this had been negative when we had to subtract it, that negative would have to carry through everything inside that multiplication. So we have to be careful of that. Now, at this point here, we can combine our like terms, because we can add 2x squared plus x squared. Well, what is 2x squared plus x squared? We have 3x squared. Well, we have negative 2x minus x. So 1, 2. We have negative 5x. Because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Total x's. And lastly, we have negative 4 plus 2 would be negative 2. So when we combine all of our like terms on the left-hand side, we get 3x squared minus 5x minus 2. So we've got everything kind of simplified down. Now we just need to get everything on the same side of the equal sign because it is a quadratic. We need this equal to 0. So it might be a little bit easier to move everything from the right-hand side to the left, moving everything this direction. Well, the first thing we can do here is we can subtract x from both sides. Because x minus x on the right-hand side would be 0, leaving us with 1. Over here, we're going to have 3x squared. Well, negative 5x minus x would be negative 6x minus 2. Yes, it is. Thank you. So it should be minus 1. That'll change things. So since it is negative 1, yes, we would add 1 to both sides. And if we add 1 to both sides, it's 3x squared minus 6x minus 1 is equal to 0. So any questions on anything we've done so far or how we got to this point here? Okay. No questions on how we get to this point here. Now we need to solve for the values of x that are going to make this thing equal 0. Can we factor this thing? Probably not, because there's no way we can use 3 and 1 and get 6. This is not factorable. So it does not mean that there's not a solution to it. It just means that we cannot factor it to find its solutions. Which means we're going to have to go back to the what? b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It is the quadratic formula. We have to use the quadratic formula to be able to solve this. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We have to use the quadratic formula to solve this because it is not factorable. So when we plug our terms in, negative b, well, that would be negative 6. Well, negative 6 is just positive 6. The negative and negative would make a positive. Plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times a, well, a is 3, times c, which is negative 1. All over 2 times a, which would be 2 times what? 3. And 2 times 3 is? 6. Any questions on how we filled any of this in? Okay. Now we can simplify and solve. At this point here, we can use the calculator and plug everything inside the square root into the calculator. Because we can parentheses negative 6, close parentheses squared, minus 4 times 3 times negative 1. And plug it in and see what we get. And if we plug all this into the calculator, well, 6 squared is 36. 4 times 3 is 12 times negative 1 would be plus 12, which will give us 48. So if we type all that into the calculator, we'll get the square root of 48. Now the graphing calculator is just going to give you a decimal answer. Which is not what we want. Now the yellow calculators, on the other hand, they will reduce the square root of 48. Because it works out that 16 times 3, 16 times 3 is 48. Well, the square root of 16 is what? 4. And we cannot take the square root of 3. So the square root of 48 will reduce to 4 square root of 3 because we can take the square root of 16. All right, guys, we're almost done with this here. This will not quite be the final answer because there is a greatest common factor between all three terms. And it is what? Well, 2. I can factor 2 out of the numerator. If I factor 2 out of 6, I have 3. Plus or minus, if I factor 2 out of 4 square root of 3, I'm left with 2 square root of 3 over 6. And the 2 and 6 will simplify. This will simplify out, and the 6 would become 3. So what we have left on top is 3 plus or minus 2 square root of 3. And this here would be our answer. This would be the final answer for this here. So there are there are going to be 2 problems that you're going to have to use the quadratic formula for on your homework to be able to solve. But all the rest of them are factorable. And we know these 2 here are not part of our restrictions because, well, our restrictions were x cannot equal 1, negative 1, or 2. And, well, 3 plus or minus 2 squared root of 3 over 3 is not one of those 3. So are there any other questions on these here? Any questions on anything we've done so far today? All right. Well, that is it.